All right, when last we left off, Richard Nixon has, on a Saturday night, fired a couple of his closest aides, including Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox, for demanding he hand over his tapes that he claimed were his because of the right of executive privilege. Now, when he doesn't hand over the tapes, when he fires Archibald Cox, there is a very, very negative reaction across the country. 150,000 telegrams come into the White House, basically saying, how could you do this? You guys are corrupt. So there is an outrage. Eventually, Nixon does hand over his tapes, and they are not good. And these aren't even the most incriminating of those, but they are not good. They do not paint a very flattering picture. Aside from the evidence that connects him to Watergate, Nixon has proven to have a little bit of a potty mouth. So the nation reels a little bit with, wow, our president swears a bunch. Doesn't have the greatest demeanor on these tapes. Now, aside from the swearing, Nixon, I'm going to kind of quote from the book, because there's a lot of stuff on here, and some of the stuff is pretty damning. Now, in a tape with White House counsel John Dean, he, quote, says this, quote, "Take care of the jackasses who are in jail." Basically meaning he wants to keep those people quiet because they can get him. So now if that's not enough to say hey, that's the smoking gun, that's the connection. Now there's a little bit of a conversation how much money would it take to take care of these people? And White House counsel John Dean estimates that it could take $1 million. To which Nixon replies, "We could get that. You could get $1 million, and you could get it in cash. I know where it could be gotten." You could say, and then basically he says, when it's suggested that they're part of it, you can just claim that we don't recall, we don't remember. So he's all these things basically saying he knows how to get $1 million, to cover this up. It can be done, and if that's what's going to take, that's what we need to do. So these are not flattering. These are not great tapes. Special prosecutor wants more. He knows he has more. So again, the White House, after a little bit of dragging their feet, eventually they give transcripts of the tapes, not the tapes themselves, but 1,200 pages of written transcripts. Again, not very flattering. They don't do a very good job of helping the president's cause. They definitely connect to Nixon's knowing and the cover-up, profanity laden, like I mentioned. And then they go after even more, we want more of these. And Nixon, again, claims executive privilege. This time, Leon Jaworski, the new special prosecutor, says, no, we don't think so, and takes Nixon to court, basically, and it ends up in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court here's the case. Richard Nixon argues that it's executive privilege. It's the president's right to keep some certain information that's potentially sensitive, that has to do with national security. It is my right to keep that separate from whether it's Congress or whoever, another part of the government. That's okay. Now here's the thing: executive privilege is not in the Constitution anywhere. You cannot find it. It's not a power that was created by the founding fathers. Now, it has been used since George Washington. He created this idea of executive privilege, and every other president along the way has claimed the right to executive privilege. So what the Supreme Court basically said is that executive privilege does exist. It is a real thing, but only in the case of national security. And unfortunately for Richard Nixon, this wasn't a case of national security. So they order him to give the tapes up. Now, for the life of me, and I've gone over this repeatedly because it's kind of a big deal in government as well. So I teach it every year. And for the life of me, I cannot think of why in the world, if I'm president of the United States, Richard Nixon, first of all, why do you tape yourself actually saying these things, bribing people and covering stuff up? And then as people are asking you to give the tapes up, why don't they end up in some mysterious garage fire? Or I was listening to them in the bathtub and I knocked them in the water and they were ruined. Why do you keep them intact? I don't understand, but Doesn't matter. I'm not the president, so you could do whatever you like. Now, during this time, the House of Representatives, whose job it is to impeach any kind of government official that has done something wrong. Now, remember, impeachment isn't removing from office. There's two steps in there. There's the House voting on impeaching, meaning, yeah, you've done something wrong and we're accusing you of doing something wrong. And then you then move to a second phase where you go to the Senate and have a trial, and they remove you from office. Well, during this time, the House starts drawing up articles of impeachment. They're like, you've done enough stuff that we're going to probably impeach you. Now, they never get to that point, because when their tapes are handed over after the Supreme Court orders Richard Nixon to do so, that is the last straw. Like, that's all the good stuff. Like, that really like is the smoking gun to say, like, for the last of his supporters, like, this is the last to say, like, okay, I guess he did it. Like, he's definitely involved. There's no way you can possibly deny it. So then, again, the House is kind of double timing it for impeachment articles. Now, when you listen to those tapes, one of the mysterious things is I just mentioned, like, why didn't the president, like, burn these or whatever? He does have, as he turns them over, so again, this is like the worst of both worlds. Instead of destroying the tapes, what he does is there is this big, like, gap, like a 16-minute gap of an erased tape. So God only knows what's on there, but I'm sure it's not good. So there is this big, long gap of just erased conversation, and I'm sure that's the really juicy stuff of all of it. So Nixon, knowing full well that not only is he going to get impeached, but there's way more than enough there to convict him in the Senate and get him removed from office, something that has never been done before. We've had 3 presidents be impeached, lots of federal judges be impeached. No president's ever been removed from office. Nixon, being a prideful guy, did not want to be the first. So, kind of like a bandit, he wants to beat the posse out of town, and he basically, like, throws in the towel and says, "I'm going to resign. You're not going to kick me out. I'm going to leave on my own." So he does resign. Gerald Ford, his new, like, appointee for vice president, takes over. Gerald Ford, like I mentioned, largely a pretty good reputation, a pretty good guy. He takes over, and he serves the rest of that term, which is like 2.5 years. Now, kind of the follow-up to this story is 25 aides served prison time from the Nixon administration. Anywhere from a couple months to like 4 years in prison. So that's a lot of people in your administration to go to jail. So this is a pretty big deal. Now, Richard Nixon himself, you're probably wondering, what happened to Richard Nixon? What happened to him? After kind of a long... Now, there's other issues going on in the country. We're kind of, sneaking into a little bit of a recession economically. We've got some issues going on. After like months and months and months, Gerald Ford eventually pardons Richard Nixon. Now, this is one of my favorite, like, stories about a president. Not only is Gerald Ford from the state of Michigan, he was a all Big Ten football player at the University of Michigan, by the way. He's a pretty interesting guy. Gerald Ford took a lot of heat for pardoning Richard Nixon. A lot of people are like, you're just covering up for your buddy, getting him out of trouble. Gerald Ford, when he pardoned Richard Nixon, made the comment like, our long national nightmare is over. Basically saying, like, it's time to put this behind us. Like, we've got other things to deal with. We've spent all this time on Watergate. It's over. All these people are going to jail. Let's move on. Call it a day. He took a lot of heat for that. Probably cost him a re-election in 1976, truth be told, because he never really got over that. Historians, though, over time, have slowly come to the realization, like, that was really the right move to make. The country did have problems. The country did need to move on. We were kind of stuck in this, like, pit of Watergate. Him moving on, kind of moving the country on, kind of let it go and started to move the country in another direction to deal with some of the problems that were coming up. Again, it probably cost him personally, but it probably helped the country in the long term. So for me, when I'm looking at a president, I think those are the kinds of decisions that make for good presidents. a lot of political courage there, and some self-sacrifice. So Gerald Ford will always rank as to me a very good president for that. Just from that one single action, that one single courageous thing. So there you go. There's the history of Watergate. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. If not, I'll talk to you.